Now we are in the final stretch, baby. Now I have recently come to realize that I don't need to wear headphones. That was an interesting discovery. Quantitative research techniques. Now we are going to be looking at the different types of, data collection techniques instead of just looking at theoretical things. Now, in quantitative research, the main goal is to gather data from a specific sample group, conduct statistical analysis, and generalize the results to a broader target population. The key characteristics of this approach include converting observations into measurable numerical data, ensuring applicability. We all know what this is now. You don't need to memorize any of this. It's going to be MCQ. So, as we said, measurable numerical data, replicable, comparable, etc. Now, we have two types of data sources. The first one being primary data sources, these being experiments, surveys, and non reactive or unobtrusive research. Now, let's go and check out what kind of this is. Experiments are the strongest way to test causal relationships because the independent variable, we learned about these, precedes the dependent variable, allowing other factors to be controlled. For example, an experimental study might compare the learning outcomes of students taking an online course versus those taking the same course face to face. Independent variables, these are, and the learning outcomes are dependent variables, okay? So we can switch the independent variables around because those are what we are trying to discuss. Now, the other method is giving surveys. These are structured questionnaires. For example, these can be, how are you feeling? How hype are you feeling from 1 to 7, for example, or 1 to 5, or 1 to 3? These are just numerical representations of the feelings of whoever we are conducting the survey on. The non reactive research is basically just you're not really engaging with the subject. They don't actually know that they are being tested. Now, I don't really understand how this is ethical because I guess research needs to be the participants need to be aware that they are within a research, but this seems to be against that. The participants are unaware, so they're not directly influenced or guided by the researchers. Therefore, this method of research is more objective, let's say, because the people being examined don't know that they are being investigated. They act more naturally. They don't really act differently. So, this eliminates observer bias, as we call it. For example, observing if low achieving students naturally prefer to sit in the back rows during an exam in order to benefit from others or cheat. I can say yes, probably. I'm sorry to everyone who prefers to sit in the back, but this is common knowledge, so cool. There are also secondary data sources. So, up until now, these were all data that the researcher himself gathered through experimentation, through surveys, through analyses like Sherlock Holmes, I guess. But secondary data sources are data that has been gathered by other institutions. For example, in Turkey, we have TÜİK, which is Türkiye İstatistik Kurumu, which is Turkish Statistical Institute, which the logo, the first time I've seen the logo, and it's very nice because it looks like statistics. My God, pure cinema. For example, you can check the data on inflation, population, income distribution, because TUIC has conducted these researches because they have the budget and the time to do these. Because this is their job, this is their little job. Although sometimes biased. Sometimes. Qualitative research techniques are different because they rely on the interpretive paradigm. They approach data collection from a completely different perspective than quantitative research, which I don't really get because it's kind of the same to me. So, the first method is conducting an interview. The participant sits next to me. I ask him questions for a long time. Maybe we talk for hours. It's a natural setting. Like we are sitting on two chairs. I ask him questions. He replies back. And if it's the informal conversational method, which I was describing before, the participants are not usually aware that they are being investigated, for example. So there are spontaneous questions that arise during the interview. It's like a clinical psychology session, like a therapy session. You sit down, you try to gather insight about the participants and ask them questions as they arise. Semi structured is a bit different. You prepare an interview guide with questions to ask and focused key points that you need to ask. But there's still flexibility for sub themes. For example, you ask, how is your attention uh, to an ADHD participant, for example? You say, do you struggle with retaining your attention in classes? And then they say, yeah, I struggle with it, and I was physically abused as a child. You have freedom to explore on that fun fact that they just dropped to see if it has any correlation with your study. But you try to follow this key points, these keywords. Standardized open ended interview is just pre arranged questions in the same sequence, set to everyone in the same sequence. Okay, so you prepare like 5 questions, you ask question one, you receive a response, you don't reply back, you just ask the second question, you then reply, third question, wait, and it's just a back and forth. You're basically like a machine. But it's open ended. This ensures informational consistency because all of the questions are the same, so the answers are all based on those questions. And it allows participants to respond in their own words, which minimizes the interviewer bias. The second method we use is focus group interviews, which is your goal is to gather deeper insights from group interaction. You basically put people maybe like a round table. It's a comfortable setting. You ask a question and then let the group discuss within each other. This leads to new ideas forming because the participants are being affected by each other. And the moderator's role, which is you, the moderator's role is to facilitate the flow of conversation. You don't dominate, you don't direct anything, you just facilitate. You just encourage people to keep going on subjects that are interesting. And you try to ensure balanced speaking time, etc. This is not important for the sake of the exam. Now, this image is a good representation of what a focus group will look like. For people who are foreigners probably wouldn't understand it that much, but for Turkish people who are knowledgeable in the meme sub fandom, I guess. This is a nice representation. These gentlemen are discussing a very important topic. This is a focus group. Observation is capturing a real picture of behavior in natural or controlled environments. The strengths are you can see nonverbal behaviors, you can ensure that the setting is natural, and you can conduct an extended analysis. What is it? Yes. For example, a researcher trying to understand consumer habits might use observation to see which products shoppers naturally gravitate toward in a supermarket. But the limitations are that they don't really have control over the other variables, that being the other factors like the noise in the environment, like the, I don't know, like the other people in the store, for example. It's difficult to quantify in descriptive statistics, and usually the sample size is quite small. When we look at document analysis, you are basically just analyzing written or visual materials. This could be films, this could be photographs, this could be cultural records, this could be statistics, this could be yearbooks. You can It grants access to unreachable historical subjects, carries no reactivity because you don't really interact with the producer, and it allows for long term analysis, and it's generally low cost. But the documents may be biased, incomplete, or difficult to code because they lack a standard format. It's just natural language. Yeah. For example, you look at a movie from the 1860s. No, that's too far away. For example, you look at 1950s and then you start to see how women are treated. So you can make inference on the value of women in those times. For example, like, or photographs in a similar manner. I'm just yapping now. The most important is experiments, surveys, non reactive research. These are primary data sources for quantitative research techniques, and information produced by other institutions are secondary data sources. For qualitative, we have interviews. One is informal conversational, two is semi structured, three is standardized open ended. In an MCQ, this will be very easy to answer. Focus group interviews, and we talked about it. It needs to be a comfortable setting. Audio slash video recording of the session needs to be in place, and there needs to be a clear guide on what to talk about. Observation, it's cool because it reflects the natural environment or the natural behavior of what you're trying to study, but you cannot really control the environment that people are in. Document analysis is just analyzing documents. And how hungry. I hope this has been useful.